Hello and welcome back to the Market Maker podcast, where I'm joined by a special guest, Romy Cuadras, who's the head of alternatives and fund solutions at Pictet Wealth Management. And with over 20 years in the wealth management industry, Romy has led global teams, advised ultra-high net worth clients across Europe, Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, all while staying grounded in her belief that empathy, resilience, and adaptability are key to long-term success. So thrilled to have you with us, Romy. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm quite excited to share my life story here.
No, absolutely. And when we spoke, I think a few weeks ago, I left that initial conversation feeling super inspired. So I know that this is going to be packed full of really cool advice. So first of all, why don't we start with where a lot of our audience is, which is in their formative years. They could be at school, university, or in their early careers, but just want to get a sense of you sort of growing up. What did you imagine that you'd be doing professionally? Like, what were your thoughts at that kind of student age?
Yes, so I'll take a little bit before student age. I need to take a step back. And I think it's important to talk about my heritage. So I'm first generation American of Cuban heritage, and like many immigrant families, and I'll come back to that in a second, parents have the traditional expectations. You got to become a lawyer, you got to become a doctor, you got to become an accountant. And it's also important to take into consideration that Cubans in Miami, especially those arriving before the mid-'80s, they feel exiled. So this is why I use the word immigrant in parentheses. And what does that mean? They always believed, I was always taught by my grandparents and my parents that we're going to return to Cuba one day, right? We're going to, Cuba's going to be democratic one day. So you need to study and acquire skills that cross the borders that are transferable. So when we go back, you can also be successful there as well as in the US. Obviously, we never went back, and I don't think we're going back ever anytime soon. And then you fast forward to high school, and I think this is where you really start thinking, in the US and the American mentality, you start thinking about college, right? Where are you going to study? Again, having that lawyer, doctor, accountant mentality, exile mindset. And I liked the social studies. I liked history. I took international relations. I was in student council. I did the mock United Nations, ironically representing Cuba. At 6, 7, 8 years old, I had encyclopedias. I'm that old. We had encyclopedias. And I remember going through them and saying I was going to be the Secretary of the United Nations. No idea what that meant at that point. So I always liked things that connected cultures, ideas, people. I thought I was going to work for the U.S. Department of State, in the embassies or United Nations. I took the test and everything. And then because life has a way of, we say in Spanish, we say when life throws you lemons, you learn to make lemonade. So I got thrown lemons. The last 2 years of high school, I worked at a gym, specifically Living Well Lady, and then nutrition and fitness center. And I really like sports science at this point. So I'm thinking of sports medicine. So you can kind of see, like the typical early, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with our lives. We have a lot of influence coming from society and our parents and our day-to-day. So if you notice, I've never said the word banking. I've never said the word finance. I've never ever thought I would imagine myself being in the, where I am today. But I think, my career path was shaped by the values and obviously being, my heritage, hard work, integrity, resilience, discipline, commitment, transferable skills, connected to people, ideas, and cultures. So that was always in the mix, just never banking or finance.
Yeah, and so even up to the point where you go to study at university, right? So you were studying international relations and Latin American studies. So I'm assuming the business part or finance hadn't even come up to, you must have been in your 18, 19, 20 years old at that point.
Yeah. So, my path to finance was definitely unconventional. But I think it was shaped by 3 things, which are really important. And we'll talk about this throughout the podcast, I hope. So one is my personal network. You'd be surprised who's going to open doors for you or where opportunities are going to come from. Having that early practical experience, and I'll come to that in a second, and the academic grounding. I think there is, even though my mom always tells me, I don't understand, did you waste your university time? I'm like, oh, quite the contrary. I do use my university degree in what I do on a day-to-day basis. So as I mentioned before, I worked at this nutrition and fitness center, and I met one of my best friends, actually. And in particular, one gentleman, he even walked my mother down the aisle at my wedding. I mean, really close person. He was working at Coots USA, so it's a private bank. And nutrition and fitness center closed. And he invited me to work on a short-term contract back in 1994. I graduated high school in 1993, so we could put the ages now. And if you probably don't remember, but for those of you who were around back then, bank statements were done manually. So they were printed, you had to split them, you had to find the checks, you had to do all this stuff that goes. So I came to work for 4 or 5 days to help with the bank statements so we can get them out to the clients. And I stayed. I stayed for 4 more years. So I worked at Coots from 1994 to 1998, and I pretty much did everything in the operations department. I did securities reconciliations. I did bill paying. I did the account openings and reviewing documents in both English and Spanish, by the way. I worked in the Fed room. This was fun. We still sent wire transfers manually, so I still have ABA numbers in my head, if you can, routing numbers in my head. This is before SWIFTs. We're still doing telexes. So really learning the banking industry. So I was there for 4 years and really learning how a bank works, right? And then I don't know if it was my 3rd or my 4th year. So it was near the end because it was around 1998 and I graduated in 1999. I went to EFG Bank. And again, my friend who brought me to Coots also left to EFG. But at this time, I had already made connections with a lot of senior management within Coots. And if you know the story of EFG, a lot of the Coots people left to EFG, and we created a bank in Miami in this particular. So I left with them, and that was huge because again, it shows and I was lucky to also have people who really valued the educational part. So they really gave me time and flexibility to be able to also finish my studies because now I'm working full time and going to school full time as well. So I went to work at EFG. They had established a presence in Miami, and they were very closely connected to Switzerland. And here I moved from operations into more trading and portfolio construction, so more on the investment side. I remember doing my FINRA licenses, my regulated license, before even having a university degree, right? So options, derivatives, supervisory, these type of things. And what was clear here also in EFGs, through a Brazilian client, actually, I was introduced to the hedge fund sector, which will completely change my life and my career and shape my career going forward. And this part was fun because I finished my university degree in 99. And if you know hedge funds, there's a lot of derivatives and statistics. The Greek alphabet is represented completely throughout, alpha, beta, etc. So I went to night classes in the community college to take classes in statistics and derivatives. And it was quite fun because first night class in Miami in a community college has a really fun crowd. So you meet different people, different networks. Now I'm not doing it for fun. I'm doing it for my work. So the motivation is different. I already have my degree, right? Your motivations are different. Now I want to be able to sound like I know what I'm talking about when I enter the room, right? And that really helps. So going back to juggling, demanding a full-time job with my studies, really honed my skills in time management, prioritization, sacrifice, which also are things, in addition to discipline, hard work, commitment, that really honed. But also the people I meet during this time. So I'm quite young. I'm quite moldable. That's a word in English. And I thankfully, I use the word luck, but to me, luck is preparation meets opportunities. I think that's a lot about luck. Lucky to have amazing people around me who also help me and push me and recognize my efforts to able to grow my career into finance, into degrees. And so Latin American history and international relations. Also remember, I'm working in private banking that's focused on Latin American markets. So that helps me also to discuss with the clients to understand their backgrounds, their cultures, the history of what's going on. Remember, this is the 90s. So most of Latin America is emerging from military dictatorships or different or social, different types of, their money, the wealth has been created, and then they want to protect that wealth. How do we protect that wealth? So believe it or not, a lot of my academic, at the moment I didn't understand it, but a lot of that academic background did help me in my international finance part. And then, of course, the turning point came in 2004 when I moved from EFG Miami to EFG Geneva. And that really set focusing 100% in hedge funds, running the fund of hedge funds from 2004 to 2007. And that really set a trajectory for the next parts of my career as well.
So do you think then that transition going from operations to then doing derivatives and the kind of more that part of finance, which can become quite complex, and then the next part when you're moving geographic locations, so all these different sort of challenges, is there parts there? Because a lot of people would be quite reluctant or fearful to put themselves through that type of challenge to start with. So just break down for me, like that mentality. Was it because of what you described from your childhood and that was kind of the way things got done? Or when you look about retrospectively and try to think about practical advice to share with other young people, when they're going through this kind of change and uncertainty and challenge, how do you think you could kind of set them up mentally to overcome those types of situations?
It's actually, I've thought a lot about this, and obviously, I knew this podcast was coming. So there's, you start thinking about your career, how things change, where you end up. And, I think there's several things. I think obviously growing up with this exile mindset, immigrant mindset, I think that there is a huge influence. I think if I add into that, being raised by a single mother in the US, and the values of hard work, discipline, commitment. And actually, whenever I had to make a decision and I didn't know, I'm scared, I don't know what to do. My mom would say in Spanish, tírate, pero nunca de cabeza. So throw yourself, dive, jump, but never head first. Always feet first. So you really think about it. Tírate, that's always been the tírate, just go for it, right? The world doesn't end. What the only guarantee, if you die, you cannot change, but everything else is fixable. Everything else can be changed. And I think, many times I had, when I moved to Geneva, one of my mom's friends, when I was very scared to leave, we're Cubans, community small. We live next to our mother, everyone in our world is Cuban, it's kind of, it's a very safe environment, right? And I'm thinking about, I remember my mom's friend saying to me, go, you can always come back. You're not exiled like we are. And it was something that it was sad. It's quite a sad statement, but at the same time, it gives you that inspiration that yes, you can be bold, you can be courageous, you can take the risks, but there's always a safety net, right? If you do it calculated, if you think about it, if you can work hard, you have those values of hard work, discipline, commitment. I think it's important. And when you talk, I think the first thing I would say to people is stay bold and be courageous. It's so important because you don't regret, I hate to say is when you're in your deathbed, you're not going to regret the things you did. You're going to regret all the things you didn't do, right? And I think this is always, mistakes are great. That's how you learn, right? So again, it takes time. I'm not going to pretend these are easy time. I'm in a part of my life as well where I've passed all of this. But I think it's about having the right people around you, having the support network. So if you fail, and I use the word fail, I don't think failure is death. That's failure. You can't come back from that. You can come back from everything else. My mom always had it in the kitchen, the sign that says, it's in Spanish, I have to translate it to English. The secret to those who succeed is the ability to start over again. And I think, and it was in Spanish, but, reading that, it was almost like a propaganda. That was part, you're reading it every day while you're eating your breakfast, it starts becoming propaganda and it stays in your brain. And I think that's the key thing is yes, be afraid, but manage that fear, take the risk, be courageous and make sure you have a support network. So if things don't go the way you think they're going to go, there's always, we can always come back out of this, right? You can always start over. And it's okay. The world doesn't. No,
I think this is such a strong message, particularly here and now, because for young people going into the industry, I think AI has changed it a lot where it's gone super competitive because applications have gone up tenfold. And so a lot of them are feeling like really deflated, very anxious, and just that idea about trying to keep going, persevering, being resilient. So all of the things that you said, super important.
And I think another one, which is important, is stay curious. AI is a great one. I mean, hello, I come from, I'm born before Google. I was born before AOL. I was born before iPhones and iPad. I mean, remember these things, right? So, if you think about my generation, what we've had to learn from a technology perspective, you have to stay curious. So now I'm doing a lot of AI courses. I'm asking my graduates and interns to teach me how to prompt properly, crypto. Let me get started on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all this, So I think stay curious and going back to why, going back to hedge funds and, and doing all this and how that background, being able to change, being able to move, being able to apply those things, but at the same time, taking a step back and saying, oops, I don't know nothing. I need to learn more. I need to stay. And I think, the world for young people, I think it's even going to be more astronomical than for me in terms of the learning curves, right? So stay curious, be adaptable, be flexible. Because there's one thing that's guaranteed in life besides death is volatility and is change.
Yeah.
That is going to be your life, except that it's going to be volatile and there will be change. So learn how to interact with that volatility and how to interact with that change.
That's such a great comment, actually. And it's something I hear when I do this podcast. I meet, really experienced people like yourself. I heard this just the other week with someone else. The only constant is change, is what they said. And you've got to have that mentality. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about, so at the top of the show, I said your job title, which is Head of Alternatives and Fund Solutions, which might make sense to some people, but probably doesn't make a great deal of clarity for many others. So perhaps you could break that down for someone who's not familiar with the day-to-day and what does it mean? What do you do? Would be great.
Yeah. So my role sits at a crucial intersection, for lack of a better word, between what we call the manufacturers of investment products. So the hedge funds, the private equity funds, real estate, mutual funds, ETFs. So the manufacturers and the distributors on the other hand, which includes the bankers, the investment specialists. So the people who bring these products to their clients. So I'm really in that intersection. So if you draw two circles, I'm in the middle, right? And essentially what I'm doing is acting as an enabler or an organizer, helping to build a comprehensive product shelf that's on one hand aligning our clients' unique investment requirements and goals, and obviously staying within the regulatory requirements, right? So strategic thinking to identify and select the right mix of products, working with the due diligence analysts to ensure the quality and suitability of the investment options, working with legal and compliance to make sure we can navigate, this evolving regulatory landscape, working with the bankers to understand, and especially in private banking, one size doesn't fit all. Clients have different outcomes. Some of them want to preserve their wealth. Some of them want to preserve their wealth plus have a income or a tick up, or some of them really want to increase, their capital, right? Their growth. So trying to figure out what fits within these three buckets, for lack of a better word. So it's what I really enjoy about my job is that you have the mix. You have a careful balance between the technical expertise, so understanding the intricacies of internal investments, fund structures, legal, et cetera, but also having strong communication and leadership skills, right? So being able to translate complex financial concepts into clear advice, fostering collaboration across internal teams, to a certain extent, breaking through and breaking down silos, speaking to client-facing professionals like the bankers and the investment specialists, and obviously keeping an eye on the markets and shifting client needs as well. So, in practice, establish the marketing activity of the products, launch product, and I use the word campaigns, but we don't really do campaigns in Pictet, but when we launch a new solution, a new idea, we do roadshows, deep dives, webinars, identify the demand from the front. What are the client needs? Are they shifting? Some regions are different. Going back to the global part, an Asian client may be completely different than a German client, than a French client. I'm inventing here, but you can find some differences. And understanding the regulatory constraints that we have and that we can't do everything the same way everywhere we go. And then, of course, providing support to the bankers, so education, client meetings, portfolio reviews, after sales support, right? So we talked about a red carpet I did recently, and this was actually a client in a specific region who's coming into a liquidity event. So they're going to start investing. Their money's now become liquid. So they're really looking at how do they invest their portfolios. These are entrepreneurs, understanding their mindset, their approach to risk, where they're sitting. So we can't do everything there. What's the goal? How old are they? Is there a next generation? working with the banker to understand all these client needs to then create holistically some portfolio using alternatives and funds. And obviously I work with my equity colleagues and my fixed income colleagues as well. So this is where I go in terms of working across internal teams, but also sometimes silos, right? So hopefully that explains it.
Yeah, no, it starts to make complete sense now as you were explaining, kind of learning when you were studying, actually. So international relations, wanting to work the UN and having ability to be really curious about culture. And it sounds like you're like, you've got to be such a chameleon to be able to adapt, be empathetic, and know the cultural nuances of different people. It sounds like it's really interesting because that's a lot of people go into school and think so you learn all the technicals, but everything you're sort of alluding to, a big chunk of that role, the success of it, comes from those interpersonal, softer skills. I wonder then, what's your advice of how people can learn those sorts of skills?
Yeah, that's think about this one. I think it's practice, and a bit of observation as well. So what do I mean by that? So if you think about, for example, the people you're around, you surround, it's a true belief who you become, who you surround yourself with, right? You play to your market, right? To whatever game, you're playing up, hopefully. So I think one of the key things is really looking at is one, creating the environment to be able to see that in action, right? So internships, graduate programs, these type of things. Sometimes you're going to be doing, some ugly, boring work where you're just typing away, right? But also be curious, to look around, see how people are doing, ask to be invited to meetings, ask to see how people react in certain things. Obviously, tuning into these type of podcasts, I think, are important as well, right? Even I watched some of your previous podcasts and learned some things as well, right? I think it's about look around, and I think back in my career, who taught me these skills, right? I think some of it obviously is inbred. I mean, I think we're born. There's a big part of our DNA, but nature versus nurture, right? So I think that there's the nature part, but the nurture is really important when you're in an environment that allows you to learn this emotional intelligence, to learn, these skill sets of being courageous, being bold, looking, reading the room, right? Learning to adapt depending on the situation you're in. The jokes I cracked at the red carpet, I would never crack at another client. And this is because I realized they actually, they were open to some of these jokes. They were open to going a bit off script, so you have to learn how to read that room, and you follow the lead. So in this case, I saw the banker. So if I see he's cracking a joke, I see, I can see, where I can step in, and again, so, but knowing where the line is, right? Where that fine line is, never cross that line, but knowing where that fine line is as well. And I think this is practice, right? It's practice. You can watch, all the TV shows, and even from TV, you can see how people, in some TV shows, how do people react in certain environments. You could see it in podcasts, like I said. So there's a lot of, especially today, there's a lot of in-person ways to learn. That I didn't have when I was growing up, right? But a big part of learning these skills, I mean, I was lucky to be surrounded by amazing private bankers. So watching them in meetings, how they handled their clients, how they handled conflict, how they handled influence. These things are really important. Again, I was lucky that I had bankers who would teach me these things, that I had the opportunity to observe this, right? So try to put yourself in that situation where you can observe, where you can learn. And if you don't have it in the office, at least make sure you're watching the podcast, you're watching those TV shows, these type of things. I think this is really important. And again, it goes back to being curious, right? Always learning to be adaptable, flexible, etc.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you said the word observation. And I absolutely agree, because if you think about, let's say, a sports analogy, like a professional elite athlete will watch tape of themselves or their competition. They will understand what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what could I extract and put into my game, into my toolbox. But yet in all other places outside of sports, it's not that systematic, particularly on the interpersonal side. And people tend to look at it as this kind of fairly abstract, undefined thing. Whereas with technicals, it's always like there's a right and a wrong answer. But actually, I think you can do the same with soft skills to a certain extent. And this isn't to make it sound really manipulative or strange. It's just, how do you actually, if someone's really great at speaking, what are the components and what are the levers they're using to get to that point where they can build empathy or excitement or read the room sort of thing. So yeah, it was really interesting, the observation side. But one of the other things I was going to ask you about, just given your career history, was handling pressure. I guess there's pressure in a straight P&L ownership sense, but there's also pressure in being in a leadership position, managing people, decisions generally. What's, the client that you described, putting their trust in you or their liquidity event, they're coming to you for advice, and I'm sure they're going to want to see results as well. So how do you handle pressure now, and then kind of thinking about it to encourage young people to build some of the frameworks to be better at that?
Yeah, so pressure is, personally, I thrive in pressure. I have a joke that if you ever have an emergency, call me. There's one thing I know how to do is this. And I laugh when I say this, but I think there's a lot behind this, and it has to do a lot with experience, right? I started, remember, in 1994, so I think we had what was 1994? It was the Mexican peso crisis. Memory serves me right. 98, we had the Russian crisis. We had the dot-com bubble. What else did we have? We had great financial crisis. Obviously, in Deutsche Bank in 2016, we had it was termed the DOJ leak of 2016, which I think was one of the worst. And what I noticed with each time, and we've had other problems now, obviously, COVID, etc. I handle them. I take them less. How do I say this? I don't want to say I don't take them less serious. They're still taken seriously, but we have the tools in place, and this is exactly what you're alluding to. Obviously, learning is that. So I think having a clear and disciplined approach, being grounded in practicalities, but also emotional resilience, right? And I think that's how you handle pressure. And I think I'm a huge, huge fan of Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and specifically of Stephen Covey's. I think this changed my life when I read, this theory of the 3 circles: the circle of concern, the circle of influence, and the circle of control. The circle of concern are things that are out of our control. We just, the markets are crashing. What can we control, right? Unless we're an actual trader or, the Fed bank, chairman, we can't really, and even then, how much can they control, right? Let's be blunt. Then you have the circle of influence, right? It's outside of our control, but we can influence somehow, right? And then the circle of control, our actions, our decisions, our preparation. How do we react to these things? And even today, it's part of our team meetings and our day-to-day interactions. So you can hear me on the floor when someone's complaining to me or saying something. I'm like, which circle are you in? To quickly put them in the mindset. Are you in the circle of concern? Are you in the circle of influence or the circle of control? Where are we sitting, right? Because then you're still allowed to complain, but complain from that circle, knowing that if you're in the circle of concern, there's nothing we can do. We need to get it off our chest and try to figure out can we control the situation or can we control the influence? And sometimes the only thing we control is ourselves, is our reaction to certain things. So I really talk about the practical part because there's that part, but this emotional resilience of understanding where you sit in these circles, for lack of a better word. And I think it's really easy to become overwhelmed by concerns outside of our control, market volatility, global economic shifts. It's very easy to fall into a victim mindset. Like, why me? Why is this happening to us? The world is going crazy. And again, I go back to these 3 circles. When you put them in these circles, it helps to give you you get out of your emotional side more into your rational mind, right? So you get out of the part of your brain that's fight or flight to then create, to then really focus on your energy and what lies in our controls, right? Actions, decisions, preparation. Where can we exert influence? And it helps create clarity and focus. I think that's really the key thing. So I really say learn the 3 circles. Your life will change. And you can use it in your personal life as well. It's not just a professional life. I think the other part is obviously preparation. I go back to preparation and trust. But trusting in the data and trusting in your own intuition because, the famous book Blink, right? at those 10,000 hours, you start becoming, it's internalized, it's in your gut, right? It's that blink. So trust your intuition. And that's in personal life as well, right? And then the other thing is to set clear boundaries. I will talk about boundaries a lot, but to maintain that mental and emotional balance, right? Systematically differentiate where to focus your attention. And, the same way we practice physical fitness, going back to your sports analogy, we really focus on our physical fitness, going to the gym. What about our mental fitness? How often are we practicing the mental fitness? And I think this is really important. And it's something that I didn't have when I was coming out, and I made lots of mistakes and, burnouts and potential burnouts. So now I really, really, really focus on that mental fitness. 3 circles. What's my focus? Where do I spend my energy? And I think the last thing is, having to be open to diverse viewpoints. And really in this day and age where we're not allowed, society is not allowing us to listen to diverse viewpoints or give diverse viewpoints, it's even more important. Read the book of that person you hate. Understand where they're coming from. And I remember reading one book, I wouldn't say which one, I even threw it across the hallway. I was much, much younger because I really didn't understand this. But I finished it. And then, and then I realized, okay, this is not, I really don't understand. But I understand better where they're coming from. So again, going back to that circle of influence. And the only thing I can control there is my reaction. Throwing a book was not the smartest thing, but doing my reaction to that particular subject matter, right? So really practicing your focus on what's in your control, your influence, helps you maintain that composure and decisiveness, having that balance between emotional and mental sides of your body, really practicing mental fitness, and trying to transform these challenges into manageable opportunities, right, for growth. So, but it takes time, right? And sometimes you're panicking, you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So even just saying, what circle am I in? Just giving yourself that grounds you. Okay, what circle am I in? We're allowed to be in the circle of concern. But always being in the circle of concern doesn't lead us to action. Right. So really trying to give yourself those tools. And this is what I use for me, but find those tools as you're growing. You other people may come across other ways, right? But these were the ones, and again, Stephen Covey changed my life when I came across this book, right? With these 3 circles.
Yeah. And as you were kind of explaining everything so far, kind of putting together all of those skills you're mentioning, and then also your journey, and giving it is somewhat unconventional to the normal kind of, I went to Stanford, did an internship, then went to here and there. I just wondered then, given the people skills that you have, the importance of stakeholder navigation, because I think a lot of students, particularly in early careers who are listening to this, no one really talks about that. It's always like the pursuit of it's like, there's the door, and it's the journey to the door and smash the door down if I can get my foot in. But then beyond the door, that's where actually your career then begins. But not a lot of that is actually spoken about. And I feel like a lot of people are left to learn on the job, which can then mean that it's quite a long, protracted thing that probably someone like you, having gone through what you've gone through, have experienced that could probably accelerate some of those learnings. So what does that mean in practice? How does someone in their early career learn the nuances of the workplace and how to manage different types of stakeholders, your colleague, your boss, your client, all at the same time?
As you were speaking, I was thinking of the movie The Matrix. And that famous line, I forgot the colors, you could take the red pill or the blue. I forgot the colors the pills were, and that changes your life, And I'm laughing. I don't know why that's the thought that came to my head, was managing the matrix. And I think it's really like, to a certain level, it's almost like that. But it's not about taking a pill or, it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that. And it's understanding the balancing, the diverse and sometimes competing interests. So the first thing is to accept and identify, 1, you have to do stakeholder navigation. 2, that there are diverse and competing interests. And sometimes you're going to, and across clients, colleagues, senior leadership, each stakeholder has a unique priority. They have their own concerns, their own communication styles. And learning to manage these dynamics is really where you can start building your career. Because then if you do it thoughtfully, you build trust and you achieve shared goals, right? So I think active listening, we go back to observation, active listening, truly hearing and understanding what others' needs and value. Sometimes you have to understand the need behind the need or the fear right? What is the hidden fear, the hidden desire? So sometimes I come up with a change maker idea, and and people start panicking because not only am I changing, I'm coming with a new idea that's already, but I'm probably going to change the day-to-day work environment of that person. And the real fear is I'm going to lose my job because I can't do that job. Right. So they'll never say that. Right. I want to stay in my comfort level. Again, I'm using this as an exaggeration here, but you have to think, there's a need. There's something they're saying, but then you really have to understand the hidden fears and the desires that are behind. Is your boss trying to get promoted to equity partner? Well, guess what? If that's the need, then help them become an equity partner. Is your boss trying to pick up his son, and I use the word his son at 6, every day? Help him get out that door to pick up. And these are very small things, but if you multiply them, right, they become bigger things. So understanding the diverse and sometimes competing interests, managing these dynamics, understanding the needs and the value through active listening, building genuine relationships across different functions and levels, so not staying in your own little world. Try to speak to people in tax, try to speak to people in legal, try to speak to people in compliance, try to speak to people in media relations. And I use this as my example because that's not my world, right? Be open, be approachable, be prepared, be visible. Visible is important. Let them know you want, which I know becomes more of a challenge with work from home. And I'm a huge fan of work from home. So I'm not saying we should take away work from home, but I think visibility is also important, but also be visible communicating your goals, your progress, what challenges. So when you see you can bring something to the table to help that person with their challenge or their capability, right? And I think a big part of this, which is something no one teaches us, we always think about managing up, right? Managing with our supervisors, but what about managing down with our junior colleagues, right? Or managing sideways with our peers and cross-functional teams. You can imagine the power for me in the graduate and junior networks, or even the executive assistants. When I work with them and I talk with them, the amount of information I get on the organization from the graduates in the junior network, sometimes things that I don't even know is going on, right? Or an executive assistant getting that meeting that's almost impossible to get just because you're nice to, you're having a conversation, you're navigating this, right? I mean, I remember when I was up for my managing director interviews in Deutsche Bank, and I was 6 months pregnant, had to go to London for an interview with the CEO, right? Standout Wealth Management CEO. And I'm like, I don't want to take a 6 o'clock in the morning flight. So I called the PA, I explained my situation, woman power, maybe, I don't know what it was, but they put the interview for 2 o'clock so I could take a late flight. It was, again, it's part of this, right? And that stakeholder navigation is not just about getting your promotion and getting, something, but it's also about helping. But it's really important not to do it Machiavellic, right? I think you can't be Machiavellic in the way you're doing because you'll see it from a mile. I can see from a mile away when someone's coming to me and you could see there. And I see it, be genuine, be authentic, be non-gossipy, right? It's not about gossiping in the water cooler. Oh my God, did you see? It's also about understanding what's happening, how the place works, right? Again, seek opportunities to work on cross-departmental projects, request feedback on your interpersonal observation, observe how experienced colleagues do things, how they're navigating, managing the matrix as we sell, but this helps build credibility and accelerate your career growth. So, and you're absolutely correct. It's not something they teach us early on in our careers. It's something I learned much later in life, especially when you're just starting to get promotions and you have the hard work, but you're not getting those promotions. It has a lot to do with your visibility. It has a lot to do with your stakeholders. They're the ones that are going to help you get those promotions. Your hard work is the foundation, but then you got to go to the next steps, right?
And how is that challenge when we spoke before, you spoke quite powerfully about being different, both from an ethnicity and a gender perspective. So given what we've just saying about being visible and these sorts of things, is that challenge, I'm not going to say harder, but different given some of those things? And what advice do you think you could give to young people trying to who might come from a minority or something of that nature?
It's great, obviously being Latina, but more importantly, a woman in a man's world, as they say. And I never thought about it before until now. until it's become more popular in the press and we have, and there is a minority, I'm not going to acknowledge, but I think being different, whether it's your ethnicity, your gender, your background, it can feel challenging in a lot of environments, right? But it's also a strength. And I think accepting that it is a strength and looking at it, changing your perspective and looking through the lens of a strength, I think changes the way you approach that, right? And I use the word victim mindset, right? We're not victims. We're not the minority. I hate that word. Guess what? We're different, yes, and it's fantastic. So actually here I have on my office, be bold or italic, never regular. And it's a joke, because it reminds me also, right? Be bold or italic, but don't be regular. It's boring. But more importantly is, be proud of your identity, whatever that identity is. Embrace your difference. You bring unique perspectives and you add value, right? And this is important, especially in our environment and the world we're living in. But be authentic. I think authenticity is also is critical, right? You can adapt to the cultural norms of a room. You can read the room to build rapport, but don't lose or dilute yourself. And another saying that I always have is from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Play is to thine own self be true. And we'll leave aside Polonius' characters. The guy who said it was a bit critical in medicine, but to thine own self be true is a motto that I've always had, right? I think we have to be true to ourselves. And if we're true to ourselves, then we're our authentic selves in front of other people. And if you have that you change the perspective that being a minority or whatever is a strength, not a weakness, that changes the way you go through. I go back to stakeholder management, build a strong network of mentors and sponsors. These are the people who understand your values, who advocate for you, who provide guidance, who help you navigate some of these complex landscapes, right? When I went from Deutsche Bank to Pictet, these very different cultural environments, corporate cultural environments. So I had a lot of mentors that helped me to adapt. So I know how I need to adapt, but still be me. Right? I'm still the person who's going to crack a joke or go off script because that's who I am, right? And don't hesitate to seek out those champions, those mentors, those people who can also help you open doors, who, like I said, who help me to navigate these landscapes. I'm in this environment. How should I dress? How should I speak? How should I, whatever. I think also recognizing your own trait makes you noticeable. Recognize that your unique traits make you noticeable in a crowd where many appear very similar. So again, using that uniqueness as a strength, not as when I walk into a room full of men, the blonde female is going to be remembered. Now let's make sure that I'm remembered for the right reasons, right? This is what's key in our technical expertise, etc. Right? But this helps. That visibility can be a powerful asset. Leverage it with confidence and courage, right? You can break conventions, you can pave your path, but remember that breaking that, when you're in there, they're going to notice who you are, especially if it's something very visible, right? I think, we talk a lot about diversity, but we need diversity in the workplace. We need the diversity of minds, diversity of thoughts, the diversity so decisions can be made. And we talk about AI. One of the things, I was actually having a conversation in London this week about AI. Is it diverse enough? Are we all going to have herd mentality because we're all prompting for the same thing? It's a very, there's behind the scenes. I won't go into the whole details, but I think it's going to be even more important to be diverse, to bring diversity to the table, especially as we use AI, because everyone's using AI. Everyone's getting the same outcomes. And we're all kind of looking like the same poster. So I think now it's even more important to set yourself, how do you set yourself aside? How do you stand out of the crowd? And I think in this environment, those who dare to bring new ideas, who challenge the norms, they become the leaders of the future, right? They're the ones who are going to shape the future. And I think embracing your difference, finding support, adapting wisely without compromising authenticity, and having the courage to be a change maker, these are the things that will help you thrive in these environments, right? But again, you've heard me say this, if you put AI through this podcast, you're going to hear a lot of words: courage, authenticity, find support, stakeholder management, right? These things are really important. And this is what I have found in my experience.
That's such an interesting thing that you said about AI and diversity, because I was reading another piece just this morning about empathy. And actually, as we start to lean more and more on these tools for productivity gains and so forth, but actually then the super skills become these skills that it's kind of like the world's gone through this massive technological shift. And obviously human behavior is to go almost too far in one direction to then kind of snap back. And yeah, I can see how not just diversity, but empathy, a lot of these skills you've talked about that are critical for human successful interactions and relationships are kind of off tools.
Yeah. And not things we're taught in school. So we have to find ways to get taught these things, right? To find these skill sets. And I think, maybe the schooling will change, but for now it's not. So it's podcasts like yours, and TED Talks. I'm a huge fan of TED Talks. They're short, quick. I can watch them on the bus on the way to work. This is how we learn these skills, right? And I think this is key. Is making sure the awareness that you need to have these skills, and secondly, how do you find these skills, right?
Mm. So my final two questions, and these are much more targeted towards the student community. And so from your perspective, given that you probably interact, as you said, downward, so lots of grads, interns, and so forth. So if you were to distill them down to some core characteristics of what is a standout performer in their early career, what would you say that those characteristics are?
Yeah. So, and actually I do some of the interviews also for the graduate program in Pictet. So I really, everyone has the same CV. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, it's going to be spoilers coming.
But I don't mean this in a bad way. I mean, these are super educated people. Amazing. I mean, I can't even compete. If I had to compete with the young people today, I'd end up working at the supermarket. I mean, let's be blunt here. The foundations, the expertise, the educational foundation that the young people have today is amazing. So how do you stand out, right? Because I go back to our AI thing, right? How do you stand out if I have 100 applications, or if you're in the office now and there's 50 graduate students, a graduate program, how do you stand out, right? And I think I go back again to the same thing: curiosity, adaptability. A continuous learning mindset, which means you ask questions. You're not embarrassed to ask questions. So I have a graduate now. I think he starts every sentence with, "Sorry to bother you, but I have a question." And, I'm like, stop with the "sorry to bother me." You're allowed to bother me. The only dumb question is the question not answered. You're not always going to have people. You're not always going to work for people who like that. Let's be also clear about this. So again, stakeholder navigation. You need to find those people you can ask those questions to. So a continuous learning mindset, being able to observe new information, understanding evolving market trends, embrace change with agility, right? So that curiosity and adaptability. If I think, especially with technological advancements, and like we were discussing earlier in the podcast, right? Embracing change with agility is very key. If you think of technical, the technical part remains important, but their ability to, like I said, learn rapidly, apply knowledge in these complex situations, to have those critical reasonings, A plus B. A lot of times I'm like, what does algebra teach you? I'm like, it teaches you to think. We're not going to be solving algebraic equations in the bank. I guarantee you that. Plus, we have lots of tools that do all the calculations for us. But the thinking, the critical reasoning skills are important, right? You go from here to here. Why? How did A plus B plus C equal D? Sometimes 2 plus 2 does equal 5. So does that happen, right? So also effective communications. And again, my intern who comes to me says, "Sorry to bother you." I love that, right? But then when he asks me the question, he clearly articulates the ideas. He challenges. He's listening actively. So the other day, my boss came to my desk and in French was giving me some instructions. So when my boss left, the intern says, "I overheard," and then nicely, because my French is third language, "Are you okay with the French? Did you miss anything?" Which I thought was so empathetic, because I was like, actually, it's really nice, because in case I missed something, he was overhearing. So he was actively listening. He was engaging with clients and colleagues, but engaging with me. So again, now I have trust in him, right? I know I can collaborate with him. I know if I'm traveling, I can send him an email, right? He can take care of things that I potentially wouldn't have given him. By the way, he just started a week ago. So let's be clear here, right? So that idea to listen actively, to articulate ideas, continuous learning mindset, observe new information, And then going back to the interpersonal skills, so the IQ or the EQ, excuse me, navigating, resolving conflicts. How do you keep yourself motivated when you don't understand what you're doing? How it doesn't fit into the bigger operations? And then resilience, right? Being able to not take things personal, separate your ego. We talk about feedback. When you receiving, your ego is the first thing to receive the feedback. Separate that, right? How do I know this is a perception? How do I know this reality? It's not my ego. It's not purposely. They're not trying to hurt me, right? Understand that. And I had a boss who combined it in three very distinct ways. And actually, I saw him last week, and I brought it up, and he was laughing because he had forgotten that he had taught me this. And it's you need that IQ, you need the EQ, and you need the BQ. And I'll get to that. So the IQ is that technical foundation, right? That goes without saying. The EQ is that emotional intelligence, right? So curiosity, adaptability, emotional intelligence, resilience, communication, collaboration, right? That's all the EQ stuff. And then the BQ, and forgive my language, but it's bloody quick, right? So be bloody quick. And what does that mean? Is being able to learn and perform rapidly, possess agility, being able to, and it's not to be fast and give bad work, but be adaptable, right? That BQ. So IQ, EQ, BQ is really the way, and I always, my three circles, I have my three EQ, IQ, BQ, and it's something that I find quite funny, but you'll remember it. It's a mnemonic you remember because again, the world takes over, the day-to-day takes over. And, if you don't take time to take a step back and think about what circle I'm in, is this IQ, EQ, BQ, if you don't have these little catchphrases to put you into the moment, into the now, you're just on the roller coaster, right? You're on the hamster wheel and you just keep going. So also take that moment to take a step back, strategize, think, have an offsite with yourself, right? I think that's really something, again, I didn't learn when I was younger. I learned it much later in life, but I think there are things that I'm trying to teach my interns and my graduates going forward.
I'm just envisaging now the PowerPoint slide I'm going to have in my next lecture now. I'm going to have the circles going. There's going to be the acronyms flying around. It's going to be cool. So maybe just the last one then, and this is perhaps a little bit more philosophical. So just to challenge you, looking retrospectively through your career, because I think a lot of the people, again, in our community, there's a lot of pressure about decisions I make now. How's that going to influence my future? How do I weight certain things, whether it's financial, emotional, and so forth. So I just wondered, what's your perspective on advice for building a meaningful, fulfilling career sort of throughout?
Yeah. So I think there's I usually get the question, one piece of advice, and I'm like, it's impossible. First, I'm a storyteller, so there's no way I could stick to one, at least three. But life is a combination of things, right, that fulfill us. And I'll start off with, again, stay bold and curious. This is, to me, is one of those things. It's career. Your career is not about moving up a ladder, right? It's a linear ladder. It's like a tube map, right? You want to get to this place, so you might have to take this tube, go down, go this way, then go around. You might have to change stations somewhere along the line. You may do a layover for a little bit of time. You may go backwards to go forward. So I think it's important to understand that it's not this corporate ladder that, it's very, so, there is a linear way, and accept that it is linear. And it's about continuous movement and progress, right? And sometimes the non-traditional path and the unexpected path is the fun path, right? It gets you to another place, but you still get to a place where you're supposed to be there. So I think embracing the journey with an open mind, so allows you to adapt, learn, and evolve, right? Don't strive for perfection. Focus on the progress, right? Use setbacks as feedback, as learning opportunities. Going back to your thing, watch your own video, your own athletic video. Okay, I missed that tackle. I'm an American football player. I missed that tackle. Oh, that guy was open. I should have thrown. I didn't see. That different. Make your own videos of yourself, right? Your mental videos, and make sure you use these learning setbacks as learning opportunities. Building a strong network. This is essential. You never know who's going to open that door for you. In my case, it was a friend of mine from the gym. And throughout my career, there's been, the weirdest things you can possibly imagine. Things just fall out and you're like, how did that happen? You never know who's going to, and that network that's going to be, when I change banks, my network helped me not only to change banks, but to adapt to this new network. When you're working on a project and you're trying to figure out how do other banks do it, that network helps you. How do you do this in your bank? How do you do, it helps you with your projects as well, right? So that relationship is important. But also is having a support network is also part of your network, right? Professional and personal, right? My son plays football, and I can tell you the amount of information I get on the Saturday morning football pitch, it's astronomical. And you're starting to create this network now out of the football pitch that I never knew I had, right? And it's really fun at the same time, which leads me to my next one. Have fun. Find joy in the work and in the process, right? It's not just the achievements, it's the journey that, my husband laughs. I enjoy planning my vacation more than I actually enjoy the vacation itself, right? So it's that journey that's fun, right? So have fun during the journey. Two that I really, really think are important, which I didn't learn till later in my life, and I think is really important, especially to young people starting out, is one is build your financial independence. This is a critical foundation. Save early, manage your finances freely, because this finances wisely, not freely, wisely. This frees you from being financially constrained and gives you the freedom to make career decisions based on growth and passion rather than necessity. And I really, really can't say this. I found myself in situations where I'm like, I want to leave, but I can't. And I think the financial independence is such a critical thing, especially as you start out. You still, hopefully, you're not making great money, but you're not spending a lot of money. You don't have the mortgages. You don't have the private schools. You don't have any of this yet. So make sure that financial independence is there, so you're not hostage to situations because of you don't have the financial independence. And the last one I'll bring is cultivate multiple identities. And what do I mean by this? Don't let your sense of self be solely tied to your job title or your function, because there will be times if you lose your job, things aren't going well, and if your self-assess is really tied up into that side of your whole life will be impacted, right? So embrace that broader identities, maintain a balance of those identities, various identities. Obviously, work is a big part of our lives, right? But if you have other things going on, it helps. So when the work part of your life is not going as you think it should be going, when you're not having fun there anymore, at least you're having fun here, right? So make sure you have a diversified portfolio of identities and fun, right? And we use a lot the whole word work-life balance. And you know what? No, it's not work-life balance. It's life balance. And work is part of your life. So erase that word from your vocabulary. Do not use, I need work-life balance. No, I need life balance. And work is a very big part of that pie chart, but it is part of that life balance. It's not work-life balance, right? You don't separate. Have those identities, so stay curious, be adaptable, build strong relationships, protect your financial freedom, embrace your full identity, and enjoy the ride. That's, I think, the key things I would say.
Wow. Well, what a finish. That was amazing. No, I mean, it's so like coming to the end of this conversation, like just your enthusiasm and your energy. And I think a lot of people have a perception about people who work generally in finance, and hopefully anyone who listens or watches this and sees you and hears about you and your story and just sees like your energy and the feeling that you get when hearing you speak. It's amazing. And so I hope it makes it more inclusive for people to think, right, actually this could be a potential sector that I could have my future. I think two points I think really stuck out to me were really like when you said about just flip that difference, that your natural instinct is that it's a negative. I am an ethnic minority. Like for me, I am working class. I come from this certain background. Like I must admit, I did have a chip on my shoulder very early in my career, and I would say that was a big driving, motivational force. But I think as I've got older, and the advice I'd give is exactly like you did. It's like turn that on its head and don't look at it as a threat, to see it as opportunity. I really love that how you said that. And then the other one, financial independence. Like very few people talk about that. I wish I'd met you when I was 21 and got my first bonus, but yeah,
I wish I felt my 50-year-old self when I was 20.
I wish I bought a London property many years ago, but sadly it wasn't the case. But But yeah, I think that's such an important thing. Like what you said, to have the freedom to choose and have options rather than through necessity. I think that's what we're all striving for in life and generally. So that was amazing. Romy, thank you so much for giving up the time to join me. And yeah, thank you very much and see you again soon.
Definitely. Thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed it.